Eventually, I started to see the world differently. The pain had taught me resilience, and the solitude showed me who I really was. I discovered new passions, built stronger friendships, and even started to feel a flicker of hope about love again. I wasn't in a rush, though. For now, peace was enough. Standing on the other side of everything that happened, I realized I didn't just survive Lauren's betrayal. I grew from it. And while the scars might always be there, they no longer define me. The life ahead felt wide open, and for the first time in years, I was ready to embrace it. I used to think our marriage was unshakable. Sure, it wasn't the stuff of romance novels. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations. But there was respect, or so I believed. Lauren and I had a rhythm, a quiet understanding that we didn't need fireworks to make it work. We were steady, predictable, even comforting in our routine. I used to joke that we were like an old pair of shoes. Worn, but reliable. It wasn't passionate, but it was real, or so I told myself. Little did I know, life was about to shove a magnifying glass over the cracks in our foundation. Then came the health scare that shifted everything. Lauren had been complaining about fatigue for weeks, but she brushed it off like she always did. "I'm fine," she'd say, waving away my concerns. But one morning, she collapsed. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to scare me. I had no choice but to insist on a trip to the hospital. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely terrified, not just for her, but for us. What if I lost her? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on staying strong for her. That's what a good partner does, right? At the hospital, I held her hand and promised to be by her side, no matter what. I'm in it too. In those early hours, I wasn't thinking about anything except her recovery. The tests, the waiting, it was agonizing, but it brought a strange clarity. For the first time in ages, I saw Lauren not as my wife, but as someone vulnerable, someone I wanted to protect. I told myself this ordeal would bring us closer. Yet, as I looked at her pale face, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling, a faint whisper that something wasn't quite right. Lauren's stubbornness made everything harder. Even after collapsing, she resisted going to the hospital. "It's nothing," she mumbled, brushing off my concerns like she always did. But this time, I couldn't ignore it. I had to carry her metaphorically and practically. Both of us knowing her pride was taking a hit. Sitting in that waiting room, I thought about how she always hated showing weakness, how she'd rather suffer silently than ask for help. I wanted to believe this was just her way of coping. Still, a part of me wondered, why hide something so serious? When the doctor finally came back, his expression gave nothing away, but the tests kept piling up. Blood work, scans, more questions than answers. Each new examination seemed like another layer peeling away at her defenses. Lauren kept insisting she felt fine, even as the machines beeped and prodded at her fragility. I stayed close, pacing the linoleum floors and refusing to let my worry show. This is routine, I told myself, trying to find comfort in logic. Yet, her resistance to every suggestion made it harder to believe she wasn't hiding something from me. Hours turned into a day, and with it came a cautious optimism. The doctors were thorough, but not alarmist. Lauren even started to lighten up, cracking a joke about how this was just her body's way of getting a vacation. I laughed, but it felt forced. The way she avoided my eyes, the way her tone didn't quite match her words. It was like she was trying to convince herself of something. Still, I ignored the creeping doubt. After all, I was her husband. If there was something wrong, she'd tell me, wouldn't she? The test results were back sooner than I expected, and I could tell something was off just by the way the nurse handed me the envelope. I remember standing there, staring at it, the edges crinkling in my grip. I'd opened it with the kind of dread reserved for a horror movie. You don't want to look, but you can't stop yourself. Reading those words felt like my brain short-circuited. An STD? My mind reeled. This wasn't just a health scare anymore. It was a betrayal wrapped in a sterile report. The implications hit me like a truck, leaving me gasping for air. I didn't confront Lauren immediately. Instead, I sat there in the hospital chair, staring at her as she slept, her face calm and peaceful. My thoughts swirled in chaos. How could this happen? We've been careful, hadn't we? The pieces didn't fit, and I hated the picture they were starting to form. Denial became my shield. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe this had some other explanation. But deep down, the whisper in my mind grew louder. It felt like someone had rewound our life and played it back with all the ugly parts I'd somehow missed. When she woke up, I tried to act normal, but my hands trembled as I handed her some water. "You're so quiet," she said, her voice soft. If only she knew the storm raging inside me. I kept thinking about how trust is like glass. Clear, fragile, and irreparable once shattered. I wanted answers, but I wasn't ready to ask the questions. Not yet. Instead, I told myself to wait for the right moment, to figure out how to even begin. The truth, though, I was terrified of what I might hear. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The report burned in my pocket, a ticking time bomb that needed to go off. When I finally asked Lauren about it, my voice wavered, not with fear, but with the kind of anger that's too big to fully control. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and searching, as if looking for a way out. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her tone betrayed her. It wasn't confusion, it was panic. That was all the confirmation I needed, and my heart sank into something cold and unrecognizable. It was like ripping a bandage off a wound that hadn't even started to heal. Slowly, hesitantly, she admitted to everything. One affair, then two, then more than I cared to count. She told me it had been happening for years, all with clients from the salon. Each word felt like another slap, each revelation heavier than the last. I couldn't believe it. The person I'd trusted most had been living a double life. And here she was, recounting it like she was confessing a minor mistake. My world crumbled right there in that sterile hospital room. When she said it had been her guilty pleasure, something inside me snapped. Guilty pleasure? Like this was some indulgent secret instead of the wrecking ball it had become? My voice rose as I demanded to know why. Why risk everything? Why betray me? She didn't have answers, or maybe she did, but none that I wanted to hear. Instead, she sat there, her eyes downcast, while I paced the room like a caged animal. Every moment stretched unbearably, the silence broken only by my questions and her weak, apologetic murmurs. I didn't know anger could feel this consuming, like a fire that burns hotter with every breath. The more I paced, the more my thoughts spiraled. Images of her with strangers, moments I thought were ours tainted by her lies. I couldn't stop myself. "Did you ever even care?" I spat, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. She flinched, but didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at me, her face a mask of guilt and something else, resignation, maybe. It was like she'd already made peace with what she'd done, while I was left drowning in its aftermath. I demanded details, knowing they'd cut me deeper, but needing them anyway. The names, the places, the lies she told to cover her tracks, it all spilled out like poison. Each revelation twisted the knife a little more. She kept saying she didn't mean to hurt me, that it was never about love, just moments of escape. Moments of escape? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'd been here, solid and steady, and she'd chosen temporary thrills over a lifetime of trust. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless, my hands trembling as I tried to process it all. Finally, I stopped asking questions. I realized I didn't want to know more. I couldn't bear to. What would be the point? No explanation could undo the damage. "You've destroyed everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I felt nothing but a hollow ache and an overwhelming urge to get away, to escape this moment that had become my worst nightmare. As I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me, one thought consumed me. I couldn't stay here, not like this. The hallway outside her room felt endless, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, but I kept moving. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the faint sound of her voice calling my name. What could she possibly say that would change anything? I needed air, space, clarity. Anything but the suffocating weight of her betrayal. When I reached the hospital exit, the crisp evening air hit me like a slap, But it wasn't enough to shake the storm inside me. Leaving her there felt cruel, but staying felt impossible. At home, I started dismantling pieces of our life together. Photos, keepsakes, little reminders of a past that now felt like a lie. Each object I touched came with a memory, bittersweet and tainted. I stuffed them into a box, not knowing what I'd do with it later, only knowing I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. It was like erasing her from my life, one item at a time. Yet, no matter how many things I packed away, the anger and hurt remained. The walls of our house, once comforting, now felt like a prison filled with ghosts of what used to be. That night, I slept on the couch, not because she wasn't there, but because I couldn't face our bed. I stared at the ceiling, the silence deafening except for my own thoughts. What now? The question haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind as I wrestled with the reality of what had happened. I didn't have a plan, just the overwhelming certainty that I couldn't go back. The life we'd built together, the promises we made, they were ashes now. As morning light filtered through the windows, one thing became clear. I needed to make a clean break, no matter how painful it might be. I thought leaving Lauren behind would bring me closure, but instead, it opened a new chapter of chaos for both of us. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her world was unraveling faster than anyone could have imagined. The salon, where she'd built her reputation, started losing clients as whispers of her affair spread. Her co-workers distanced themselves, treating her with the kind of polite coldness reserved for those who've broken unspoken rules. It was as if the betrayal hadn't just been against me. It was against everyone who thought they knew her. Family was supposed to be her refuge, but even they struggled to look past what she'd done. Her parents, once so proud of her, seemed to retreat, offering less support as the weight of her choices became public knowledge. Friends she'd leaned on for years disappeared like smoke, leaving her increasingly isolated. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction in hearing about her struggles. But at the same time, a part of me pitied her. No one could shoulder this kind of fallout without breaking, and it was clear Lauren was no exception. Her health didn't help matters. The disease that started all of this continued to take its toll, weakening her as she tried to piece her life back together. Alone, exhausted, and rejected, she was a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. But instead of softening my anger, it only reinforced my decision to leave. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Still, there was an emptiness to it all, a lingering sense that the story wasn't over yet. I didn't want to look back, but I couldn't help wondering how far she could fall before hitting rock bottom. It didn't take long for Lauren's parents to step in, desperate to salvage what was left of their daughter's life. They called me, pleading for clarity, insisting there must be some misunderstanding. At first, I hesitated. How could I explain everything without ripping their world apart too? But eventually, I told them the truth. The affairs, the lies, the STD report. The silence on the other end of the line said everything. They couldn't believe it, couldn't reconcile the woman they raised with the choices she'd made. There must be more to this, her mother said softly, but her voice cracked, betraying her doubt. A week later, I heard they confronted her. Lauren apparently tried to defend herself, but the weight of her actions was too heavy to ignore. Her father, always the stoic one, was said to have walked out mid-conversation, leaving her in tears. Her mother stayed longer, but even she left eventually, her face pale and shaken. It was as though Lauren had burned a bridge she didn't even realize she was standing on. For a family that once seemed so close-knit, the fracture was devastating. They'd always been her safety net, but now, even they were pulling away. Mutual friends told me her parents cut contact soon after, their disappointment too great to overcome. Lauren's isolation was now complete. No support from work, no friends to lean on, and no family to fall back on. I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. Seeing someone unravel so completely, even someone who had hurt me so deeply, stirred a strange mix of emotions. But any sympathy I felt was outweighed by the relief of knowing I was no longer part of her chaos. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the worst was yet to come. For her, and maybe even for me. I thought the worst was behind me, But the divorce proved I was wrong. Lauren didn't go quietly, far from it. She fought every step of the way, contesting everything from the division of assets to who got to keep the dog we never even walked. It wasn't about what she wanted. It was about making things harder for me. Her arguments were thin, almost laughable at times, but her persistence was draining. Each court appearance felt like reopening wounds I was desperate to heal. I began to wonder if I'd ever truly be free of her. Her manipulations didn't stop in the courtroom. She played the victim card to anyone who would listen, painting me as the cold-hearted husband who abandoned her in her time of need. Mutual friends, though fewer and fewer, reached out, asking for my side of the story. It was exhausting having to relive everything just to defend myself. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let people believe what they wanted. But the other part, the part still raw from the betrayal, couldn't let it go. I needed people to know the truth, even if it cost me my peace. The process dragged on for months, each step a battle in a war I never wanted to fight. But with every document signed and every judgment ruled, I felt a small weight lift. Lauren's tactics grew weaker, her resistance less focused, as though even she was starting to tire of the fight. By the end, there was nothing left to contest. The divorce was finalized, and for the first time in years, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Still, the scars were there, and I knew the road ahead would be long. But at least now it was mine to walk. 2 years. That's how long it took to finally feel like I could breathe again. The divorce was finalized, the papers tucked away in a drawer I rarely opened. Life after Lauren wasn't easy at first. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders. Her favorite coffee mug in the back of the cabinet, her handwriting on old grocery lists. But little by little, I started reclaiming those spaces. I donated the things that no longer served me, rearranged furniture, and began rebuilding a home that felt like mine. It wasn't just the house that needed a makeover. It was me too. Therapy helped. So did the gym. I threw myself into anything that felt like forward motion, even when I wasn't sure where it was taking me. Some days were better than others. On good days, I'd feel the weight of it all lifting, like I was finally letting go of the anger and betrayal. On bad days, I'd catch myself replaying old arguments or wondering if I could have done something differently. But I learned to sit with those feelings, to let them pass without letting them take over. Slowly, the bad days became fewer, the good ones more frequent. Eventually, I started to see the world differently. The pain had taught me resilience, and the solitude showed me who I really was. I discovered new passions, built stronger friendships, and even started to feel a flicker of hope about love again. I wasn't in a rush, though. For now, peace was enough. Standing on the other side of everything that happened, I realized I didn't just survive Lauren's betrayal. I grew from it. And while the scars might always be there, they no longer defined me. The life ahead felt wide open, and for the first time in years, I was ready to embrace it.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.